Everyone, today we're going to talk about fat loss. And many of you may think that this is probably what we maybe should have started the program on, and maybe we should have spent probably the whole program on. Uh, and you've got an argument there. This is going to be if you're getting paid to coach, especially private clients. This is going to be essentially your number one challenge, your number one task, the number one reason people are going to bring their money to you and swap your time for their money. So if you can get good at helping people lose fat, you probably, earn a living as an exercise scientist. And we'll jump in today and kind of refer back to some of the science that we've been using. I started this opening screen up with some of the drama masks because there's so much drama associated with theories and science on fat loss. And so we're going to bring in some science, some experience, and maybe some softer science as well. Some things that are maybe kind of popular and in vogue right now, and just kind of discuss those a little bit. And of the many things that we talk about today, you may need to rely on all of them to help certain individuals out, or you may find that with the majority of the population, by doing a couple of the bigger things, you basically solve their problem and are able to help them out. And along with that, there's going to be things that aren't listed today that should be listed. Maybe I forgot about them. Maybe I'm not comfortable talking about them. But yeah, just a kind of a drama-filled topic and a subject for the day. Here we go. So when we do get around to fat loss, what's really happening is that we're utilizing fatty acids that are stored within our fat cells. And some of the science that's associated with that and the biochemistry, it's not really pertinent for our priorities. Not really the direction that we want to go with this program. But this is just a little clue if you wanted to maybe dive in deeper to that. This would just be maybe that first step in that direction, is to figure out what all that stuff means. So fatty acid utilization. And we're just going to assume that a lot of times that fatty acid utilization occurs when we're doing a lot of other things properly. So just remember we've got fat stored throughout our bodies, and there is a way to access it. Now, is there always a clear-cut way to access it or a perfect way? Probably not necessarily. So that's why we're going to talk about several different topics today. Okay, why do people want to lose fat? Well, maybe it's because they want to look good in their bikinis and their Speedos. But you also got to remember that there's that health association as well. So while malnutrition is the world's most serious health problem, according to the United Nations report, 2012, obesity is the 5th leading cause of death globally. So it's so unusual, but basically our bodies are programmed to seek out high amounts of calories and to store them in case of emergencies. Now, that's how we were programmed for eons and generations out on the African plains. But because of the technological age that we live in now, we're basically hardwired for the wrong environment. A lot of us are anyways. So many of us in the Western and modernized worlds, our programming does not fit our environment. So that is one of the reasons why fat loss is so often and frequently sort of out of control. Or not fat loss, but fat gain. So, but there are way more people dying of hunger than there are of obesity. From what I've seen. I actually had to look it up because I just wanted to double check. I was pretty confident that there's so many unfortunate people on the planet. I was pretty confident that more people were starving, but I just wanted to double check because I wasn't sure where the numbers were at. But it's still about 4-to-1 of dying of starvation versus dying of obesity or metabolic syndrome issues. Again, how are we going to lose fat, and how are we going to help other people lose fat? Oh, it's kind of funny. You would think that this would be sort of just a cut and dry science and a simple conversation, and to some people it might be, but to other people, you need to have a much longer, in-depth conversation, and you need to bring up some obscure topics because trying maybe just the basic exercise more and eat less principle just doesn't seem to work for some people. And maybe that, I'm not necessarily saying that doesn't work for some people because they have some crazy, unique metabolic issue or anything like that. It just doesn't work for them because they're a human and not a lab rat, and they just can't adhere to it. So there's just, like Shrek would say, there's layers here like an onion. So it just depends on where people are coming from, not only what is scientifically appropriate and what's the hard science, but some of the soft science that comes with it and some of the psychology that comes with it as well. So probably the 6 things we're going to talk about today, really 5, would be measuring body fat, calories and the laws of thermodynamics, training for fat loss, psychology, nutrition, and just a reminder, I am not a registered dietitian, so that's going to carry with it a little bit more opinion and bias than some of the other topic areas. And I'll include some resources towards the end of just some things that I've leaned on and relied on in the past, and just something to share with y'all. So how are we going to measure body fat? Well, luckily, there's a lot of ways to measure body fat. The DEXA is that if you see that sort of a table that individual is laying on, and that arm that's above that individual is going to scan them back. It's going to go back and forth and scan over their body, and it's giving them basically a low-level X-ray, and it's looking at sort of the lean mass and the bone matter and some of the fat mass that's in that body. And that's one of your better or more accurate methods. The bod pod is sort of that escape. What does that look like? Sort of like an escape pod in a spaceship, I guess. So sitting in there, and it's pressurized, and so by using the volume of your body compared to the pressure of the air, it's able to spit out a calculation for body fat. Hydrostatic weighing. So in the bottom right there, you see an individual getting dropped under the water, and they're going to compare. They're going to compare some things about the weight on the weight on the strap versus the volume in the pool, and another one of your top. Those are probably your top 3 methods. There's bioelectric impedance, which is passing a small electric current through the body, which you can't feel the electric current, but there's handheld devices. Some scales do it. Some bigger products have basically like a bigger scale that is supposed to be better. I'm not so sure if it is or not. I have some experience with the brand InBody, which makes a pretty good product. Not perfect. I have a couple complaints for them, but pretty good product, pretty accurate, pretty consistent, at least. Maybe not accurate, but consistent. Skin folds would just be the skin calipers pinching the fat and measuring the distance, or the distance of the amount of skin and fat that's pulled up. Or just doing a tape measure for different body sites and looking for maybe some measurement differences there. And none of these systems are perfect, so you may also want to just revert back to photographs, and just getting on a scale is another way for us to measure as well. Although So many of these things are not going to tell us exactly what's going on with the body fat versus perhaps muscle. So it's not, no way is perfect. So to quote Christian Thibodeau, if you chase performance, muscle will follow. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to get so hung up on chasing as perfect body fat for our athletes that we forget to keep their performance a priority. Now, if this is, I don't know, somebody who's just a general population, they just want to get leaner, okay, then these things become maybe a little bit higher priority or a higher stress point. Or if it was someone who's going to be, in front of a video camera or being photographed, and they had been told or were convinced that they needed to get leaner for that role, then those things are sort of becoming more important. But just remember, if they're athletes, their performance is the most important thing, not necessarily a specific or perfect body fat percentage. And just to bring out some ideas of how inconsistent these body fat measuring devices can be. Looking at each one, you're going to see basically some numbers that are telling us approximately how off you might be. And I'll say that I've been around DEXAs, bod pods, bioelectric impedance, skin folds, and tape measurements. And haven't been around hydrostatic weighing. Been around scale, obviously, that's pretty common. And I'll say this is that I have had athletes who have improved in the weight room, improved on the field, but their scores when they go to get their bod pod or DEXA scan or whatever, or I'm the one doing their skin calipers, have not improved. And so even though they have these very real or nearly objective improvements on the field in the weight room, and they're on cloud nine, they're feeling good, they come in, they're like, okay, I'm doing more pull-ups, I did more bench press, my squat went up, I'm sure I'm leaner and I'm better, and I'm getting better in every way, and I'm feeling good. And then these numbers come back and it tells them that they got fatter or that they've lost some muscle mass. Wow, that's so disheartening and so demoralizing. So just remember, if you're going to use this, keep it as a tool, but I would be aware of keeping it as the shining star of your program or of all your goals. So especially with athletes where, if they've got a little gut hanging over their belt, but they're cranking out home runs, or they are scoring touchdowns, or they are, doing whatever they need to do, scoring goals. If they're doing what they need to do, then what's a little extra body fat really matters. So let's make sure we prioritize what's important. And for our athletes, that's going to be performance. Now, on the other hand, if a client is paying you money to help them lose fat, then this becomes a little bit more important. Now, the gold standard for measuring body fat at this point is actually to sort of beg, borrow, and steal a few different factors or variables from different ways of measuring body fat. So for body volume, you would use hydrostatic weighing. Bioelectric impedance could provide the score for body water, and then the DEXA scan could provide a bone measurement content amount. And then by combining the information from that, we're really supposed to get around a 1%, plus or minus 1% of accuracy. So if you're obsessed, then you got to know how much body fat you actually are, and looking in the mirror doesn't do the trick, and doing a scale on the skin folds does the trick, and you really had to know. You could sort of mix and match a few of those models, and that would give you that multi-compartment model, which would be considered the gold standard by many. Calories and thermodynamics. So starting out, before we get into that, let's just define our metabolism. Metabolism is a term used to describe all chemical reactions involved in maintaining the living state of cells in an organism. Metabolism can be conveniently divided into two categories: catabolism, the breakdown of molecules to obtain energy, and anabolism, the synthesis of all compounds needed by the cells. So when we're shrinking our fat cells, we're in a catabolic state, and we're utilizing the energy that's stored within those fat cells. Those fatty acids are getting utilized, and we like that. Anabolism or anabolism is the addition of energy to tissues. So fat cells might be getting bigger, also might be getting anabolic. That applies to our muscle mass as well. But for our purposes today, that's kind of how we're going to define the shrinking of fat cells versus the enlarging, and with that, the associated weight loss or weight gain. So calories in versus calories out. And what I probably haven't said is that a pound of fat is about 3,500 calories. So if we go out of our way to eat an additional 3,500 calories above and beyond our use of calories on a daily basis, then we, in theory, would gain about 1 pound of fat per day. So when we want to lose fat, well, what do? We try to create a caloric deficit. We try to be more active and utilize more more calories than we are taking in on a given day. And then in hopes that our body will figure out to find those extra calories in, maybe that fat tire that's around our waistline. And this is not a bad theory. For a lot of individuals, it works, and sometimes it doesn't work. And that could be due to maybe just more complex matters going on with their physiology and some hormones and issues like that. Or it could just be psychological, and they really struggle with the discipline that comes with these life changes, or the feelings of hunger and things like that. So it's multifactorial, and as to why someone might be struggling. But I would argue that the perfect equation of calories in versus calories out is a little bit flawed when it comes to the human body, because we're not just simple mechanisms. We have we've got so many different factors going on. We have complex nervous systems. Our endocrine systems and hormones can be all over the place, and we can maybe be eating foods that aren't digesting properly. It's not what you eat, it's what you absorb. So we might be eating a certain amount of calories, but some of those calories are just passing through us. Depending on how you're measuring things, you might be losing fat and utilizing those fatty acids and shrinking those fat cells. But if you're getting on a scale that's flawed and giving you bad numbers, you may not know it. And so there's just so many reasons for why the law of thermodynamics should play a big role in the approach for fat loss. But you may have to branch out and utilize some other tools if it's not getting the job done. So one of the reasons that calories in versus calorie out theory and the law of thermodynamics may not perfectly hold true for every single given day of every single human is something as simple as stress reducing our basal metabolic rate or our resting metabolic rate by increasing the hormone cortisol. And cortisol is going to It's going to decrease our fatty acid utilization and increase our fatty acid storage. So at times of stress, we're not going to be losing fat like we might maybe want to. And again, it should be as simple as 1 + 1 = 2, but because there's just different factors going on, it's not what you eat, it's not what you absorb, the different hormones that can be coursing through the body, some things like that. It just makes it a little bit more difficult, and it's not always a perfect flat out equation. And I just wanted to include something about diminishing returns. If you're looking for maybe eating less in hopes of speeding up your weight loss, or exercising more in hopes of speeding up your weight loss, or maybe doing both, what you may do is you may surpass that most productive space and start going into diminishing returns, where all your efforts and you're trying harder and harder, but you may have gone past sort of that sweet spot and to the point where you're stressing your body out and your body feels like it's in a state of starvation. And what it's going to do there is it's going to start slowing down its metabolic processes and actually sort of guarding the energy of the body. And so it's going to actually make it harder sometimes to reduce fat on the body. Okay, so training for fat loss. And again, bring up Christian Thibaudeau, who says, never chase fatigue, chase performance. And that can be applied to many different avenues of conversations, especially within this program. We could probably use that quote on basically every discussion that we have. But for today, I really want to focus on because we're not, one, we want to prioritize performance above any body composition changes, unless you are maybe a bodybuilder or you're a model. I don't know, you wear underwear for a living. I thought about going that way, but with, there's just so much travel involved and all that stuff. But anyways, so never chase fatigue. We don't just want to make people tired. We want to train them towards something, ideally. And that even sort of rings true with this fat loss approach. And we're going to talk about why. So when we're training for fat loss, I would argue that training for muscular hypertrophy is going to be one of your better possible routes. And I just included that photo of the fat versus muscle because I want people to be thinking about what it's like inside the body. Is that, if we've got those, tape measurements on the body, then when we're losing fat, that's going to have a big impact on sort of the shrinking of certain measurements. But if we're training hard and we're lifting weights and doing some resistance training, and we'll talk about why that's such a good idea, then muscle might be growing inside of that skin as well. And so your numbers might be shrinking on the tape measure, but maybe not as much as you want. Or maybe you're not using a tape measure and you're just using a scale. And maybe on the scale, your numbers aren't changing at all. But if you were to use a tape measure, you would see quite a few changes. So that's why it can be so powerful to do the simple things like using a scale and a tape measure and maybe taking some photographs every month or two or something like that. And then skin calipers are pretty easy, low cost, low time, convenient. So just by doing a few different things, you can get a better sort of comprehensive look at maybe what's going on within the body. And then also measuring performance. How many push-ups can they do? How strong are they? How fast can they complete some runs? Whatever you want to test, it's going to give you an idea of how that performance is coming along. So again, be thinking about what's going on within the body. And I've been super tempted to do a bunch of annotations today, but I've waited long enough. Okay, so be thinking that we've got some fat over here. We've got some fat over here. And then down here we have muscle. So you and I both know that fat does not become muscle and muscle does not become fat. That's probably like anatomy 101, like basic myth that needs to be busted. But younger individuals or just those who aren't educated on it, they may have heard, or just the lingo might be, turn this muscle into fat, whatever it is. But you and I both know that that doesn't actually happen. So I just wanted to double check and make sure that we remember sort of some of that basic anatomy, is that those tissues are different. One, hopefully if it's what we want to do, hopefully we're shrinking some of that fat a little bit and we're growing some of that muscle. So that's why performing hypertrophy work, that's one of the reasons that it's going to lead towards helping us. By building this up, it's actually going to help reduce this. And we'll talk about that more very soon. Again, just want to reiterate that muscle and fat are two different tissues. As we lose or gain one, we can lose or gain the other. It can be very difficult to lose fat and gain muscle at the same time, but that's what so many individuals want to do. We want to take an educated approach towards attempting to do that. Although the argument could be made that, remember our two terms from earlier, catabolism and anabolism. Remember, it's very hard to basically be catabolic in your fat cells and anabolic in your muscle cells. But that's not to say that they have to be occurring at the same time. It could also be in little phases where we're losing some fat and we're rebuilding some muscle. So I'm going to stop there instead of going on a big old tangent, but I just want to reiterate that they're two different tissues and they're going to be going through two different experiences, basically. Okay, so I've said that muscular hypertrophy is for losers. So as in weight loss, if you want to be a loser of body fat, then knowing your RMR or your basal metabolic BMR or RMR is big. So this can be tested fairly accurately. It's just knowing, and by measuring the breathing pattern at rest, it will give us an idea based on the gas exchange that's going on. Will give us an idea of how much that body is using just to maintain bodily processes and to fuel just basically like treading water. If you look at that, I guess that's a teddy bear on the couch on top there. That's, if we were just to be a slot, have just a lazy day on the couch, binge watching The Office or Seinfeld or whatever it is, that's how many calories you would burn that day with just laying around. So not any extra workouts or anything like that. That's just your body doing maintenance, your heart beating, your digestive tract moving around, your your synapses firing in your brain. This is just sort of like basic standard maintenance work. But because so many people are tested, you can get sort of an idea based on your age, sex, height, and weight, what your RMR might be, just even if you can't have it tested. And as you'll see, heavier individuals have higher RMRs. So the bigger we are, the more calories we burn on a given day. And I want to bring this up specifically because I want to remind everybody that muscular hypertrophy is for losers. So if we can grow our muscles a little bit bigger, it's going to have a benefit on boosting our RMR, our resting metabolic rate, and we'll start to naturally use more calories on a given day. So just taking a look back at our different training styles. So if our fat loss individuals are coming into the weight room and wanting to do some type of training, I would argue that hypertrophy would be where my program would revolve around, would spend the most time. So taking a look here, let's just make like some quick and basic calculations. So let's say you're doing some strength training and you're training at 90% and you did 3 sets at 2. And I pretended that individual's 1 rep max was 100 pounds. So 90 times 3 times 2 is 540. So that's our volume of work. However many calories that burns is however many calories it burns. So now moving to more of a hypertrophy workload, we're at 80%, and we would do maybe 5 sets of 6, and that bumps us up to 2,400 volume of work. And then last, but definitely not least, would be maybe a muscular endurance training session. And it could be 60% for 3 sets of 15. And that gives us the most volume of work on the given day. But still, I would contend that we would want hypertrophy to be our primary training style for fat loss, even though the muscular endurance protocol would give us a higher volume of training. And there's a couple reasons why. Let's take a look why. Well, the more muscle we have on our body, we're going to have a higher RMR. So if we're going in there and doing a muscular endurance training, that might burn more calories during the workout, but it will not have the same increase in muscle mass as the hypertrophy work would. So we're giving up, within our training session, we're giving up a potential for more volume of work and more calories burned. But what we're exchanging it for is a potential to burn more calories throughout the rest of the day and while we're sleeping that night, and perpetually for the next several years as we have larger muscles on our skeletons and on our frames at all times. So that's one of the other reasons that I would emphasize muscular hypertrophy is for losers. I didn't say it yet, but that strength work, and it sort of depends on all of your clients' goals and your athletes' goals, but I will say that having worked with some morbidly obese individuals, the effect of carrying so much weight around on their bodies at all times in combination with a constant surplus calories, and I'm talking about individuals that are in the mid and upper 400 pounds in this situation, and they're not big football players or sumo wrestlers. They don't really have a need for it. It's just a life choices and sort of what they're doing, and then they decide that they don't want to do that anymore. So another reason, when you have those truly kind of large, unusually large individuals, that strength training, they don't really need to lift heavy because their bodies have been lifting heavier than everybody else has on a regular basis, day after day for years. And a lot of times they're pretty darn strong. So that's another reason why I wouldn't necessarily focus on strength training for maybe some of my fat loss athletes or clients. And then with EPOC, or excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, what you'll find is that the right amount of hard work may not burn as many calories during the session, but it creates an oxygen deficit that the body will be playing catch up for several hours after the training session. And this will raise the amount of calories burned overall. So let's say it has to do with lifting weights. Okay, our endurance training protocol may burn more calories during the session, but our hypertrophy training protocol may cause enough stress so that calories are still being burned after the training session is over with. And the same thing for running. If I go out and jog for three or 4 miles, I'll burn however many calories I burn. If I go out and run a dozen 100-yard sprints, that's going to be, let's see, dozen 1,200 yards. Let's say I ran 18 of them. So that would be 1 mile. If I ran 18 100-yard sprints, that would be the equivalent of 1 mile versus jogging 3 miles. So my 3-mile jog is going to burn more calories overall. But by performing those maybe 18 100-yard sprints, which would be a heck of a workout, depending on how hard you're sprinting, but that'd be so traumatic that the body is going to be continuing to heal and absorb and suck up oxygen after that workout for several hours. Whereas a 3-mile jog, 5 or 10 minutes later after I'm done jogging, sort of casually, maybe just like listening to a podcast or whatever it is, 5 or 10 minutes later, my core temperature is dropping, kind of returning to normal. My breathing pattern has sort of normalized, and my muscle fibers are kind of normal. They didn't really get stressed out too much. Whereas maybe 18 100-yard sprints was 1/3 the amount of work, but would be a pretty tremendously stressful workout. And I'm not recommending somebody go out and run 18 100-yard sprints, but that would be sort of the approach for EPOC here. Is that greater stress here leads to a higher demand and need for oxygen in order to recover. Whereas, my 3-mile jog, I stop right there and I'm done absorbing additional oxygen, and my metabolism just returns to normal. So if we think back to that metabolism definition from earlier, just using energy for our body processes. And again, just reiterating EPOC. It's actually the anaerobic work, which burns less calories during, and has to do with shorter bouts and efforts. It's actually those more aggressive and anaerobic efforts that will raise and lengthen our EPOC and will boost our overall caloric usage by giving us a faster metabolism, a higher resting metabolic rate. So let's take a minute and just sort of compare two extremes, a marathon runner and a sprinter. Okay, our marathon runner is sort of existing somewhere down here. So the energy system used could be that glycolysis and phosphagen. And using glycolysis and phosphagen, we know that in order to restore those and rebuild those, it takes a little bit of time, but also takes quite a bit of energy to refuel the body, so to speak. Whereas the oxidative system, there's not much energy restores that happens after the fact. There's not as much of that epoch. So once you're done, a few minutes later, your metabolism is kind of back to normal. Your muscles are kind of back to normal. It's not to say, a world champion marathoner going out and running 26.2 miles faster than I've ever maybe run a single mile. It's not to say that they're not going through an extremely traumatic process. But for the majority of our athletes and clients, we can take that idea and maybe start to lean towards a more challenging interval work versus longer, slower, like trudging through the neighborhood kind of jogs. So looking at sort of that long, slow distance stuff, maybe that heart rate gets up to about 80% max. And that's a good amount of work. You're going to be burning calories during that. And it's also good for your health. It's going to help improve your cardiovascular system, your heart health, all that. It's good. It's healthy for us. But if we're talking about optimizing some of our fat loss, you may actually want to look to some of the more higher intensity protocols here. So our heart rate is going to be higher in the tempo training, the intervals, and the repetition. And if you look at some of the duration, such as the intervals and the repetition, you start to see that that's more in the time zone that's associated with glycolysis and phosphagen utilization. And again, that has a little bit more to do with adjusting your epoch. And then also while we're at it, I'm not kind of a meathead. I'm a proud card carrying meathead. And for me, I'd rather look like a sprinter than a marathon runner, but that's just me. Now, do I want to go out and run sprints all the time in order to look like a sprinter? That's a different conversation. But, if you look at, I like this slide here. If you look at this little text box here, it talks about how the sprinters have well-developed upper bodies compared to long-distance runners. So for me, yeah, I kind of like that because I'm vain. I'm vain like that, and I like to tell myself that I've got some kind of upper body on me compared to long-distance runners. And their legs and glutes, which provide them that explosive start so necessary for successful sprinters, are also significantly larger and stronger than long-distance runners. So not only are we talking about the differences that sprinting has on post-exercise oxygen consumption, or EPOC, or that one slide called it excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. So not only are we talking about what's happening with the energy systems and the trauma that comes with that type of training and the oxygen that's going to be getting pulled in to help recover from that. Now if we're looking at this text box here, we're talking about increasing muscle mass as well because of that explosive work. And if we think back to our muscle fiber types, our type 2B has to do with explosive movements and also lifting of heavy weights. So by sprinting, we're going to grow bigger muscles. And when we grow bigger muscles, we raise our resting metabolic rate. So we like that as well. So it's sort of a two-pronged approach. Is that marathon running and long, slow distance work, that's giving our body the signal to use the oxidative system and to shrink our muscles because that's more efficient, right? You don't want to drag 280 pounds of muscle through a marathon. That's not optimal. But sprinting tells us to get stronger muscles and to maybe grow some bigger muscles as well. So when it comes to fat loss, there's nothing wrong with doing Long, slow distance work, it just may not be optimal. And I would say a blend of the two would probably be ideal. And I would also say that the popularity or the dependence on long, slow work is too popular. I don't know. There's got to be a Mean Girls reference in there somewhere, but it's more popular than it should be. Neat. So this isn't so much training as just sort of lifestyle. Neat. When I think of neat, I think of non-exercise aerobic time. If you want to use bigger words, you can, but you guys know by now, I like to keep it simple. So exercise activity thermogenesis would be calories burned while intentionally exercising. At the gym, in your basement, going out and playing basketball or doing pull-ups or whatever it is. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT, is the energy expended for basically everything except for exercising and sleep, I guess, according to this definition. So sort of how can we sneak in more NEAT? How can we find a little bit more aerobic time throughout the day? So mowing your own lawn, walking up a flight of stairs instead of taking the elevator. This one mentions, fidgeting from a strong cup of black coffee. We're going to talk about some ice bath stuff later on. But I would also say that standing up, using standing desks, is probably one of the strongest moves you could make regarding NEAT and just boosting your caloric usage throughout the day. So, if you take millions of Americans who are sitting for 8 or 9 hours a day at work, and then they go home and relax, and they sit down for another 3 or 4 hours. Okay, you're sitting down for 12 to 13 hours a day, plus 7 or 8 hours of sleep at night. There's so little, and maybe they're getting 1 or 2 hard workouts in a day, but that still doesn't mean that they're not sitting for 14 hours a day or so. And there's a lot of negative things that come with that, not just fat gain, not just fat loss, but there's heart issues, diabetes, cancers. So sitting for 12 hours a day is not really ideal, not really how we're built. And there's also orthopedic issues such as neck and back pain. So if we can get people standing up more often, they're going to use more muscle they're going to have more muscle activity, and they're going to burn more calories throughout the day. It's just how we're built. It's a simple way to improve their quality of life, their health, and their waistline. So consider preaching to people about standing up. Pardon me, sneeze. Oof. I want to bring back this diminishing returns again, because remember, more is not always more. We just talked about how we would train, hypertrophy work, maybe more stressful sprints instead of long distance work, maybe standing up instead of sitting down. What if we're always in a state of stress? If we're overtraining and working out too hard, too often, and not resting, then we're missing that high productivity sort of green space. And we're going to start to enter that diminishing return space and possibly even into negative returns. So it's always very heartbreaking. It's always heartbreaking when individuals come to me and they have been cutting calories and they've been getting in, they went from, 0 workouts a day or 0 workouts a week to like 9 workouts a week, and they're not losing weight, or they lost a few pounds and then they hit a brick wall and they're plateaued for the last several weeks. There's a sweet spot where your body is overly stressed and the hormones are going to shift, and it's going to start to retain and guard all the calories and all the energy within the body. So along with all the other scientific approaches and educated approaches we've had to training that have been brought up so far, once again, with fat loss training, we also need to know that you can easily do too much. Just like with everything else, there can be too much. So more is not always more. I also want to bring up some of the psychology. And I do not mean to compare people in need of fat loss to elephants, but this happens to be a really good analogy. So please forgive me if anybody's offended. And I understand the story goes that baby elephants have a rope tied around them, and they slam a stake into the ground. And that baby elephant will fight and pull against that stake, and it has no success. And so it just stays in the length of its rope. It has that little circle that it can walk in. I guess the trick is that as the baby elephant grows, it's not a baby anymore. Is that same stake that goes in the ground, the elephant could easily rip the stake out and, march out of the circus tent or wherever it is, out of the zoo or whatever. But because that elephant, when it was little, that stake was driven into the ground, and that baby elephant would fight against it and had no success. Well, maybe now that elephant is like 5 times larger and stronger. Well, if that elephant wanted to, it could pull that stake out of the ground. But it just happens so much in its youth that it's learned helplessness. That elephant no longer even tries. And from what I've seen with fat loss, a lot of people have that similar issue, is that maybe they were overweight as children, or they've been on a few diets, or they've had some personal trainers before or coaches before, and whatever they've done has not been successful. So much like the elephant, is that they don't believe that they can be successful. So I would say the psychology, that would be one of my biggest coaching points, is to try to build that confidence. And just keep in mind how important the mind is for this weight loss and fat loss journey. Is that they've done studies where they've had individuals do positive affirmations and kind of tell themselves that they look good, that they're looking thinner and things like that. And that being the main differentiator or variable, the individuals who have positive affirmations and more positive mindsets are more successful with their fat loss journeys. So I just want to kind of show that's like two sides of the same coin, is that elephant who has learned helplessness. Well, on the other side of that, if we can start teaching ourselves to basically believe and be more positive, is that we can have, there's benefits there as well. Wow, we are taking up a whole lot of time here, so I'm going to buzz through this stuff, which is good because it's not, there's so much drama associated with all this stuff, is that now I have an excuse just to kind of jump through it and not really, hopefully not show too many of my biases or my beliefs. So just so I can try to keep this video to a reasonable length, this might be one that you might have to pause and reflect on some of these slides a little bit more on your own. But basically, our hunger versus our satiation are driven by leptin and ghrelin. Ghrelin tells us we're hungry. Leptin tells us we don't need to eat anymore. Some individuals, their hormones are out of whack, and they end up eating more than they need to. Testosterone and cortisol are inverse. So when we have more cortisol, when we are stressed, we have less testosterone. And testosterone helps us build muscle and lose lose weight and basically be stronger and have more muscle mass. So 6 big things to do would be get enough sleep, maintain a balanced diet, lose weight, which is kind of funny, but that's part of it. Stay active, reduce your stress, and avoid drugs and alcohol abuse. If you have not ever heard about the microbiome in the stomach, I would encourage you to do some research. It is pretty fascinating space. So how to kind of boost the quality of flora in your gut, lower your stress levels, get more sleep, eat slowly. So when we scarf and jam foods down there, it sort of disrupts the environment in the stomach. Take a prebiotic, probiotic, or just eat fermented foods. If you're really struggling, you may want to find out if you have any food intolerances. And if you're having stomach problems over and over again, maybe you don't know what to change, but just changing something may help you feel better. It could go the other way, it could get worse, but just sometimes you gotta change things. So the glycemic index and a glycemic effect. So for the glycemic index, items with high number scores absorb and digest faster than items with low number scores. And the faster things digest and are absorbed, this gives us an insulin spike, which is then followed by an insulin crash. And so this can cause us problems. We have lower energy during that insulin crash. Our blood sugar levels might spike. We become insulin insensitive. So think about like a type 2 diabetic who may have to give themselves insulin shots because their insulin receptors no longer function normally. And again, this doesn't mean that carbs are bad or that we can't have sweets or we can't have simple carbs. It just means that there might be a time and a place. So if it's right before bed, maybe you don't need let's see, what's a high glycemic item? Dates. If it's right before bed, maybe you don't need 2 handfuls of dates, which are 141 glycemic index score on this chart. So, we may not necessarily want to spike our blood sugar levels and then do nothing. So if we're utilizing energy, so if we're playing sports or being active, exercising, that may be a better time to take those high glycemic items in. Whereas if we're about to go to bed, we might want to eat some lower glycemic items, such as yogurt was a score of 20. Let's see. Peas have a 32. Yeah, maybe some yogurt and peas before bed. That sounds delicious, right? But it has a lower glycemic index, so it's going to keep our blood sugar levels from spiking too high at a time of low need. Again, we don't need to be afraid of carbs. And also, especially if you have athletes, the majority of athletes are going to probably want carbs in their diet. Yes, I know there's ketogenic diets out right now. I know there's athletes who claim to be running like ultra marathons without carbs. More power to them. That's a little bit outside my scope of expertise. I just want to throw out some different ideas here, but not mentioned today would be the ketogenic diet. We didn't get into intermittent fasting, which is the process of not changing necessarily what foods you're eating, but just changing the style in which you eat them and limiting your feeding window. So there's a lot of things that we aren't talking about today, just because we're about to pass the hour marker here. And I'm trying to get you guys out of here sort of ASAP. Here's a handful of books or resources that I would advise looking into, and just a real quick recap on them. why zebras don't get ulcers has very little to do with food, but everything to do with stress. And if you guys picked up on it today, that cortisol hormone, I believe I misspelled it on several of my slides, put an E on it, but extremely important and has a lot to do with why we're storing fat. Why We Get Fat by Gary Taubes is a interesting look at maybe breaking down some of the myths and dogma that's coming with individuals fattening up and becoming obese. Nutrient timing, so a little bit more on how we can eat optimally to boost performance. The Renaissance Diet by Dr. Mike Israetel is great practical information. Sort of in that same great practical information block, I would put Stan Efferding's Vertical Diet. And then I put in some of the information from Precision Nutrition, which is a nutrition coaching company. And what I really like about them is that they're not really clinging to any one way or one diet. And they sort of have this like sweet, peaceful approach that, you know, lots of different diets work, and they're going to help you figure out how to incorporate the diet of your choosing and making it your own and making it successful, which is just so logical. It drives me crazy that I didn't think of doing that. But they've got a great reputation and they have good information. And if you're interested, I would check it out. Sleep is going to be one of your best. So I want to throw in some hacks and studies real quick. So I'll buzz through these. Sleep is going to be one of your best methods for boosting fat loss, as well as increasing health and performance and like everything else. So make sure you're sleeping. And then just, I don't know if this is my last annotation for the day, but I'll get one more in. So check it out over here. You're not going to be burning a whole lot of calories because you're at your lowest possible point of your VO2 max. So you're not working very hard when you're sleeping. But of the calories that you are burning, you're at about 100% fatty acids. So if you're not sleeping, if you're not getting downtime throughout the day, chances are you're going to fatten up a little bit. And that's why, and that's one of the most basic reasons why is you're missing out on, again, when we sleep, we don't burn very many calories, but the calories we do burn is basically 100% from pulling from your fatty acids. Something else that's kind of out there is ice baths. So there's some logic and rationale for why getting into water around 58 degrees for 10 to 15 minutes a few times a week is going to basically challenge your body to utilize fat in order to maintain body temperature and to not become hypothermic. And the other argument might be that going into heat would be a better idea because when we go into heat, we have to shunt our blood around to the surface of our skin to help us cool off. So there's different theories and philosophies on it, but I just put a couple of resources in there for you, including one research study that includes another complex diagram on why cold exposure will boost fat loss. And if this is our last slide, just wanted to include, amongst other things, something funky, is that the potential for more aggressive breathing patterns may also be conducive or linked to burning additional fat. So Wim Hof is a bit of a character, but he has some followers and he has some logic. But I just want to put this on there. This is definitely not my, of all the slides today, this is not the one I'm hanging my hat on and that I'm like beating my chest on and saying is correct. This is probably the most obscure thing that I've brought up today, or that I would even bring up if I was doing a weight loss or a fat loss consultation with somebody. I don't know that I would ever even bring this up. Maybe this would be after, just for fun to do sometime, or just for kicks to talk about, maybe not to even do it. So again, fat loss can be very dramatic. There's so many different thoughts and philosophies. Mm, some are safe and some aren't. But just make sure that you're keeping people safe, and try to hit that sweet spot where we don't want to starve people and we don't want to overwork them. And as long as you're keeping them healthy and focusing on performance, um, I think everything else will sort of fall into place. Okay, guys, that is it for today. Thank you.